Good afternoon to everybody. It's a privilege and a pleasure for me to be standing here before you. And Fanta, as well as the moderator in Nairobi, mentioned it. And I think by the time we leave this room today, if we forget everything that has been said, we will remember one thing: $287 billion. It is the contribution that young women on the continent, who represent 50% of a youth population that is growing, stand to contribute to our continent. Senator Crystal Asige, a young woman senator from Kenya, said this, and I thought it was profound for the conversation that we're having today. If all you see is all you see, then you don't see all there is to be seen. The question is, what do we see? Who do we see? Do we see the opportunities that young women stand to bring to the table? Or do we see a social challenge that we have? Because that drives two different conversations: an economic conversation versus a social conversation. $287 billion, really important to our continent's economy. 87% of this $287 billion contribution could come from advancing young women in higher nodes of the agriculture value chain. Agriculture remains one of the sectors that employs the highest number of young women. But guess what? They're at the very bottom of it. When young men are making 70 cents on the dollar, young women are making way less. Accelerating their ability to grow in sectors like manufacturing, skilled trade, wholesale retail, education, and accommodation will make such a big difference in young women's ability to contribute. However, $287 billion will not come if we're not intentional. The report that we've undertaken together with McKinsey shows that actually young women's contributions to our economy is actually on the decline. In 2000, young women contributed 18% to our GDP. In 2022, that contribution has gone down to 11%. 11%. And if we don't do anything, in a few years, I sure don't want to be standing here telling you something else. Recently, I was asked, but why is this? And why is because the first step to accessing work, dignified and fulfilling work at that, which is measured by the wage, which then is how we measure contribution, is actually very low for young women. Only 26% of girls complete secondary school. And even fewer go on to tertiary education. Now, for those of us who are standing in this room, when you went for your interview, there is something there that asks you, where did you go to school? Where did you graduate from? What kind of diploma did you get? Well, if only 26% of our girls are actually finalizing and finishing secondary education, how do we get to this $287 billion contribution? What we also see is that actually they start dropping right at the end of primary education. And something happens when they drop. 1 in 4 young women on the continent will have given birth by or before the age of 18. I met young women between 18 and 22. And it's shocking to see. She's holding one child on one side, and the other child is at her feet. And she says to us, if I had a choice, I would go back to school. But look at me. Do you see me? Where and how will I go to school? 11.4 million young women who are provided with the care support that they need would be able to go to work. 11.4 million, which means that addressing the time poverty and care challenge of young women on the continent is urgent, it is necessary, and we must act. Then I move on to something that is really near and dear to my heart, seeing the number of years that I've spent trying to fix this problem. Limited access to finance. Finance, finance, finance. Only 10% of women-owned SMEs on the continent have adequate funding, resulting in a 34% lower monthly income compared to men-owned businesses. The picture is even more dire when you're looking at young women in rural areas. They're afraid of the financial system. They do not trust it. And so, as a result, they rely on informal or traditional financial systems, which on their own are actually a good thing, right? It's a good starting point. Village savings and loans, SACCOs, ideally instruments that we should look at perhaps a bit more closer. But because we haven't, it hampers and hinders their ability to start, grow, sustainable, strong businesses. And therefore, as such, 3.7% of young women are actually borrowing from formal financial services. In this day and age, limited access to digital skills will cause young women not to be able to access the kind of high-wage, dignified, and fulfilling work that we're aspiring for them to access. If only 64,000 young women are actually in technology work. Finally, we cannot achieve this if our governments are not creating the gender-responsive policies and reform that create the enabling environment that young women need in order for them to thrive, in order for them to actually provide those $287 billion that our economy on the continent cannot afford to lose. So, we want the $287 billion, I'm sure we do. However, it requires intentionality at all levels, within every single area of the work that all of us in this room actually do. There is no Africa we want if young women are not seated at the table. There is no Africa we want if Africa is flying with one wing. Have you seen a plane that takes off with one wing? So with that, I encourage all of you to join us. The MasterCard Foundation has made a commitment, 21 million young women in work by 2030. It is 70% of our 30 million youth in work objectives by 2030. Everybody's asking us, but parity is 50%. Why are you going 70%? The gap is wide. The gap is wide. Therefore, if we want to flip the script, we have to accelerate, and this is why focusing on young women is critical and important for our work moving forward. Thank you so much for your attention.
Distinguished guests, Esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, today we stand on the shoulders of giants. Throughout history, dating back to the 17th century, African women, like the fearless Agoje warriors, too powerful to be defeated. They have defied countless odds, shattered glass ceilings, and inspired generations. Our resilience and unwavering spirit are the very fabric of our continent, driving change and fostering growth. It is indeed a privilege to celebrate our achievements and ignite the spark of our limitless potential as African women. African women have always been agents of transformation, from leadership to entrepreneurship. Across the continent, I mean across the African continent, from the north, the south, east, and west. And because we're here to celebrate African women, permit me to list some of the countless names that have inspired me growing up, and I'm certain they have also inspired a lot of us in this room and those listening to us. We have from the West, women like Her Excellency Ellen Johnson Sirleaf of Liberia, the continent's first female democratically elected president, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, the Director General of WTO, the World Trade Organization. And of course, this list wouldn't be complete if I don't mention the Queen Aminas of our generation, of our time. The Queen Aminas of our time, Her Excellency Amina J. Mohammed, the United Nations Deputy Secretary General, and we have Her Excellency Amina Jibril Mohammed of Kenya, who also contested for the position of DG of WTO. We have also from the East, Dr. Wangari Maathai, a Ugandan political activist and environmentalist, the first Kenya, apologies. Oh, my sincere apologies. What? You, Kenya or Uganda? Kenya. Oh, apologies, Kenyans. Because I followed Wangari, Dr. Mattai's story, and I don't know why I assumed. But I know she was the first African woman to win a Nobel Peace Prize. And she shared the stage at the time with also amazing, amazing women from across the world. Well, apologies once again to my dear East Africans, Kenyans. Well, from the East again, we have Our Excellency Samia Suluhu Hassan, the President of Tanzania, who aspires, the President of Tanzania. And then from the South, finally, we have Her Excellency Netumbo Nandi Ndaitwah, the Namibian Vice President, who aspires to be the continent's second politically, democratically elected female president. In the north of Africa, we have women like Raya Mansour, the Egyptian entrepreneur, business magnate, and environmentalist. These women have broken barriers, but they represent only a fraction of our story. Across rural villages, urban cities, urban areas, and in every sector, countless women are contributing to the socio-economic development of their communities. They are the farmers sustaining local economies, the entrepreneurs creating jobs, the leaders advocating for social justice and inclusion, and they are the managers of our homes. Despite these contributions, much of their potential remains untapped. Today, I would like to focus on how we can unlock that potential, and I'm grateful to the previous speaker, Esther, for also setting the tone for my address. The reality is that while African women drive growth, they face significant barriers, such as lack of access to resources, majorly finance, education, and most importantly, access to healthcare. Africa's GDP reached $3.1 trillion in 2022, but young women only contributed 11%, like we already heard, which is sadly a decline from 18% that was recorded in year 2000. So are we making progress or are we declining? Female unemployment rates continue to remain higher compared to their male counterparts, and many young women are neither employed nor in education or training. This is not just a loss for women. It is indeed a loss for our entire continent. But we have the power to change that narrative. Studies show that increasing women's participation in the workforce could add billions to Africa's GDP. Again, we heard earlier, it's $280 billion by 2030. And doing this together, we will be able to create about 21 million jobs. Well, I would like to make a commitment that 5 million of these 21 million jobs for young women will come from Nigeria. We have a target to create 10 million jobs, but because we also know that inclusion is an important, our young women inclusion policy for all programs and initiatives is 50%. So they must have equal opportunities as the young male counterparts. And that means if we're creating 10 million jobs, then half of those jobs have to be young women. So, when women succeed, their communities thrive, poverty declines, and economies prosper. Empowering young women to fully engage in the economy is not just a moral imperative, it is essential for Africa's future. So speaking of empowerment, we also said that governments must play a role to be intentional, like Esther said. In addition to our 50% inclusion in the programs and initiatives of the Ministry of Youth Development, we also have secured the presidential approval to implement a 30% youth inclusion in governance. And this also captures an equitable inclusion of young women at decision-making tables. So without young women at the table, I do not think we can make this progress. We cannot actualize this goal or this dream that we all aspire to achieve. So we hope to bring more young women to decision-making tables to promote the interests and advance implementation of policies that greatly impact young women. Well, we also know that education is a fundamental step that we must achieve. When young women stay in schools, they become powerful agents of change. And education is the foundation of every prosperous society, and it equips young women with the tools they need to succeed in today's economy. We must invest in policies and programs that ensure girls have equal access to education, allowing them to develop the skills needed to participate fully in the workforce. We also need to accelerate financial inclusion. Women must have access, equal access, to banking credit and investment opportunities. And studies have shown that women are more bankable than men. No? Well, the World Bank said so. So, financial services empower women to start businesses and expand enterprises and to contribute meaningfully to economies across sectors. So, access to capital is key to unlocking women's potential as entrepreneurs and innovators. Next, we must address the burden of unpaid care work. And like we said, we must ensure that our women show up to show out. See me out here quoting Fanta. So yes, The responsibility continues. The responsibility of unpaid care work continues to disproportionately fall on women, limiting their ability to engage in the workforce. Promoting shared responsibility within households and investing in public infrastructure for childcare and adult care will free up women's time and enable them to pursue education and economic opportunities. Furthermore, we must ensure that young women are equipped with the skills they need to thrive in high-impact sectors such as agribusiness, renewable energy, and of course, technology. These industries offer significant income potential and opportunities for women to raise their economic standing. In today's digital world, digital skills are essential for competitiveness, and we must ensure that women are not left behind. The future of work is digital, and women must be empowered to take advantage of these opportunities. Finally, none of these efforts will succeed without inclusive policies that reflect the realities of young women's lives. We must create targeted policies that prioritize education, promote financial inclusion, and address the social barriers preventing women from fully participating and co-driving economic development. As we look to the future, empowering the next generation of African women must be our priority. We must create an environment where young women are encouraged to dream big, to create an environment where young girls contribute and their contributions are recognized and their rights protected. By investing in women, we're investing in the future of our continent, Africa. Therefore, here's a call to action. Today, I call on all stakeholders, governments, the private sector leaders, civil society, and individuals to commit to accelerating our progress. Together, we can create a continent where every woman can succeed, where her achievements are celebrated and her resilience is rewarded with tangible support. The journey ahead is not easy, but if we continue to support and invest in African women, we will unlock the potential, the full potential of our economies and build stronger communities and create a prosperous and inclusive future for all. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies. It's a great privilege, it's an honor for me to be here. MasterCard, thank you for inviting me. I'm going to take you back many, many years. I grew up in the 60s. That makes me Gen what? Right? 60s. Then, my mother was a primary school teacher. My father, a secondary school teacher. My mother ran a club in our compound, village club. Other women in the village would come to our compound and they had this women's group. So I grew up in the women's movement because every village had someone who brought other women together in her compound. And the women would have conversations, would learn income generation skills, would learn early childhood development, how to grow, make nutrition, all the life-saving skills and homemaking skills. And my mother was the leader of her village group. I sat with them, I listened. When they'd finished doing some class, then they would have a general conversation, and it generally was on one thing. It was about keeping their daughters in school. This was the big issue of the generation of my mother. In our country, across Africa, boys had had a head start, were in school, but girls were either not starting at all or were being pulled out after 3 or 4 years and married off. There was also early marriage. So my mother's generation wanted to see their daughters go to school and stay in school. And that was their big issue. I'm here today, and many women of my generation, when we meet, we say this, that our mothers fought for us to finish school. We are the first generation of African girls that got these degrees in so many professions. It's our mothers. Now, that's the 60s. Fast forward, come to the 90s, 30 years later. We mobilized and we all went to Beijing, 1995. I was there. Somebody mentioned here Her Excellency Netumbo Ndaitwah, who I hope will become the next president of Namibia. She led us here in the PrepComs, preparing for that very important Fourth World Conference on Women. She was leading us, the Africa group, in fighting for the rights of African women. In that discussion, it is us African women who fought and fought up to Beijing. It was still not decided. From here to New York to Beijing in August, who fought to have in that platform for action a special critical area on the girl child. It's an African introduction. The argument was that we are putting in all the critical areas the full life cycle of a woman, from the day she's born to an infant, to a teenager, to a young woman, to old age. And so we don't need a special girl child. We said no. And why? Because on our continent, girls were not even completing primary school at that time. No, they were still dropping out after 3-4 years. And we were insisting that girls are losing the possibility of becoming empowered equal women at a very early stage. We want to catch it there. So we got the girl child. Now, that is where the force came from. Those debates and negotiations for the girl child focused very much on her education and health. Education, closing the gap at primary school level. That is the birth of FAWE. FAWE is here, I know. That was the birth of FAWE, Forum for African Women Educationalists. They went out, led us to push the international financial institutions. The World Bank and IMF were saying, oh, Africa doesn't have the fiscal space to roll out universal primary education. Can you believe that? In 10 years, FAWE led us. We pushed, and the gap between girls and boys at primary school level began to close, and the doors opened for all school kids to be in primary school without paying. I'm giving you this story because I want to come to where we are now. After that, that's 30 years ago. Now, 30 years forward. Next year will be Beijing plus 30. Where are we? We are faced with a situation where the progress has been there, but we are not where we want to be. Our countries today are facing low growth, are choking on debt, and debt servicing, debt repayments are crowding out spending on education, on health, on social protection. How did we get here? Our countries at some point had, if I can recall in the 80s, that was a lost decade for Africa. Were choking on debt then. Then some relief came, a big relief came. The Jubilee debt campaign, if you recall. After that, our countries then went to borrow again. This time, they were borrowing for infrastructure. They borrowed heavily. They needed the money. They borrowed for roads, for bridges, for telecommunications, and so on. They invested there. They invested less in human beings, in education and health. They invested more in physical infrastructure. Now, through no fault of their own, this debt has been multiplying. It's not their fault. We didn't start the war in Ukraine that led to high interest rates. A lot of external factors have led to that debt multiplying several times. That is where we are now. But what are the choices that our leaders are making? I wanted to run through some data points, but I heard many people before me make those data points to make the case for girls' education, to make the case that it is an investment, not a cost. I could run through those figures for you, but I won't, because we've heard them. The investment in girls' education leads to growth, reduces early marriage, reduces violence, brings more income to girls on the market, to women on the market. We know all this, so I won't take you there. But it's not happening. Like I said, borrowing has been mainly for physical infrastructure. And now with debt repayments up there, the spending on education and health is dropping. In some countries, on average, I could say, debt repayments are 4-5 times more than they spend on education. Health debt repayments are in some countries 6-7 times more than investment in the health of people. At the height of the debt crisis in the 80s, President Nyerere, our great leader, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, posed the question. He said, should we really let our people starve so that we can pay our debts? He posed that question. We have to ask the question now. How long will we keep negotiating for debt relief? Because every day that we don't get it, a child is not in school, a girl is married off early, a life is lost. We need to get this debt relief quickly and substantively so that there is space for a country to invest in its people, while also, and don't get me wrong, this is not about debt forgiveness. No. Every time a government goes to borrow, in Africa, we go to borrow in an unfair market. When you hear of this huge debt, it was borrowed, some of it at very high interest rates that the rich countries don't pay. So the ground is not level to start with. Secondly, there's a lot of reckless borrowing. And for every reckless loan, there is perhaps a corrupt, reckless official on one side of borrowing, and there is another corrupt and reckless official on whoever is lending. Let's face it, takes two to tango. So when we talk about this debt restructuring, we're not talking about charity here. We're talking about good, fair economics, considering that the borrower needs to borrow again. You're in one economic system, one financial system. You need to calibrate the system so that there's space for interaction. So it's not about asking for charity, it's about demanding for an international financial architecture that is fair. And that includes the debt restructuring. This is what the Secretary General is proposing to governments here, to start a process to reach a restructuring as quickly as possible. I want to I wanted to give you some examples of how much we are restricted. Angola, Ghana, Kenya, Malawi, Rwanda, Uganda, Zambia, you can see the range of countries, all are spending more than 50% of their total revenue on paying the interest on their debt. More than 50%. So the rest is what goes into health, education, social, everything else. That is how serious it is. So I've spent time on talking on debt. We need a recalibration of the financial architecture. We need a debt restructuring that is quick, that is substantive. There have been some forms. There's something called the Common Framework that took. It's very long, very complicated. Zambia got some relief from it recently, but it's like too little, too late. So we need something better. Beside that, let me speak also to our own, what we need to do with our own governments. Our governments must move on to tax more progressively and have more in their coffers. When you look at how they have been taxing, they've done it the lazy way, which is to tax consumption. We pay a tax on everything we buy, and that actually passes the tax burden to poorer people. It's a regressive form of taxation. They do not want, they are reluctant to tax the very rich and the big companies. I have to finish, yes. So we want to see them stop those tax holidays to their friends in the business sector. We want to see them be very serious about taxing high incomes so that money comes for girls' education. And the last part is we want to see a reform of the global tax system. It allows big companies to shore off their profits without leaving in the country, paying their fair share in the country. So these are reforms that may be started through processes that we want to start through this Summit of the Future. The Summit of the Future is about resetting the multilateral system so that rules, we all live in a rules-based world, but the rules that are fair and that give a chance to an African girl to have a full round of education. Beijing, my call is Beijing plus 30 next year. Far away, women's organizations, girls' movements. Lead us there to bring about the same change we brought 30 years ago. This time for secondary education. Secondary education, 60% of our girls don't complete. This is wrong. Let's move to push governments, shift priorities to pay for girls' education and not to balance this, not to pay for bridges and forget to keep our girls in school. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for inviting me on this wonderful occasion. I want to congratulate my sister, but I also, more than that, want to put emphasis on partnerships and collaboration and really posit today as a demonstration of what we can achieve together if we are in conversation with each other. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to my panelists, my esteemed panelists. But before I do that, I want you to keep in mind what the theme of our panel discussion is, because we want to give meaning and make useful contributions. Visionaries in conversation, charting new paths. The charting new paths is the most important part of this title. Why? Because you chart a new path when the road on which you have been traveling is too arduous and it's not taking you to where you need to go. You chart a new path when you are not making progress. Dr. Winnie, you spoke about progress has been made, but we are not where we ought to be. So, the moment has come for us to chart a new path and find other avenues to get us where we ought to be. I'm going to ask you first the same question before we get into the heart of the matter. How would you assess the magnitude of the challenge when it comes to empowering women and thus transforming Africa? We've reflected on particular historical moments where we've made progress, where certain plans were adopted globally, but with all the data and the statistics before us, the lived experiences of women in Africa, what is your sense of the magnitude of the challenge?
So I think one of the key things that we've all heard about partnership and why it's very important. And I think that that is the core of us charting a new path. I think partnership is very key. But take, for example, entrepreneurship. Africa has the highest number of female entrepreneurs globally. And that speaks to something. And so if that statistic is actually prevalent, then there should not be a case where there's not access to financing, right? If they have the highest number of entrepreneurs. And so I think that that's one of the core issues when it comes to empowering African women. Women naturally, African women naturally, we are pace setters, we're go-getters. And so I think finding a solution to really supporting African women as entrepreneurs is critical in this scenario.
Dr. Jubaima, your sense of the magnitude?
Thank you very much, and such a pleasure to be here. One of the things I'll start with, it's been said before, but it bears repeating again, that African women have driven our economies for decades. And what I see the challenge as is we've been trying to fix the women. Mm-hmm. Every bank wants to build financial literacy of women. Every program wants to train young women to get this skill and that skill. Mm-hmm. And in the process, we have forgotten that sometimes it is the systems that these women are working in, whether it's the financial system, I think Winnie said it very well, whether it's the financial system, whether it is our economic system. Some of the numbers we saw do not even include the unpaid care work that women do, including young women, because nobody is recognizing or counting it. We've decided that's a women's burden. Mm-hmm. Care is not a burden. Without care, we would not even be sitting here. Without care, what happens to the future generation? But we've decided it's a woman's problem. Instead of fixing that economic system that has decided that the work of care will be provided by women at no cost. And when that happens, then women cannot go into the economic market. But we have to start there by looking at our system. The financial system, when they see a woman walk through the bank, are they seeing the entrepreneur that she's talking about? Or are they seeing a young woman who has no land, they are asking her for land as collateral. And yet our policies do not recognize the equal rights to land by women and girls. So how then are you gonna have a young woman at the bank and you're asking for land as collateral? So that whole system needs to change. And for me, that's why I think we still have a big magnitude of the problem, because every day we are trying to fix African women instead of fixing these systems that they are operating in. And that's what we need to do.
Natalie Akon-Gabala, your thoughts on the scale of the problem, but the two previous speakers have also now taken us very neatly to a conversation about the structural barriers. Can you add your voice to that as well?
So first, on the scale of the problem, I think the MasterCard Foundation has understood the scale of the problem. It's about 50% of the African population. It's about where are the pockets of growth when you look at the state of the world today. Who is going to drive the economy in the world? And the young woman is at the center of it. So we can't afford not looking at this problem, because she's the driver of the economy for the world tomorrow. Now, in terms of the critical barrier, I always I'm a financier. I've spent all my career in finance, but for me, looking at the problem of finance is like looking at watching a movie and arriving at the end of the movie without having watched the beginning of the movie. The fact that the young woman is not accessing the loan is the result of many, many, many barriers that she had faced. So it requires working and understanding those barriers we spoke about education, but we haven't even spoken about gender-based violence. In many of our countries, Kenya, South Africa, over 5 women out of 10, as part of the studies that we've conducted in the private sector,
report having faced gender-based violence. And young women are even more susceptible to be aggressed. So she can't even go to work in a safe environment. So talking about the issue of finance is, for me, part of the problem. But as it's mentioned, it has to be looked in the globality. And that's why it requires different type of organization working together. It requires the MasterCard Foundation working with the financer. It requires working with communities. We require working with the young women themselves to understand. We will talk more, later about the financial barrier in more detail, but I thought it was important to set this framework.
My next question really is about policy proposals, some of the policies that work and how we can scale them up. And as you think about your answer to that, something just stands up to my mind when I interact with my little children, 2 girls, 10 and 8. When I say, I'm so thirsty, they go, drink water. When I say, I'm so tired, go to sleep. When I say, it's so hot, switch on the aircon. They are in the realm of possibility and finding solutions. They're telling me there's a solution for this thing that you are whining about. So I'm thinking we have reckoned with the statistics, with the status quo. That is absolutely unacceptable to us. But something then tells me that are these situations policy choices? Is the poverty of women a policy choice? Is the exclusion of women a policy choice? The debt that is hanging like an albatross around our necks as Africans, is that a policy choice? Talk to me about that a little. The policies that work, and how do we scale them up and make them so mainstream that we don't have to gather here and debate them again?
All right. Amen to that. So I think there's certainly room for ingenuity and creativity when it comes to our policy. And I'll speak on behalf of the U.S. government, since I'm a government official. And I would say, so in our work in 2022, President Biden hosted the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit, where he invited African heads of state to Washington, D.C. And what we did at that summit was we came up with a policy initiative to really come up with a unique way to engage the African diaspora when it comes to our U.S.-Africa foreign policy. We see the African diaspora as a source of strength. The U.S. has a very unique relationship with Africa. And so your Ghanaian American, Nigerian American, Cameroon American, I think that they can play a unique role when it comes to this partnership aspect of really helping to empower women, empower youth, empower entrepreneurs, et cetera. And so engaging the diaspora for us is, for us, really a new path, right? A new path that we have chartered to really employ our Africa policy. And so now we have this council where we recommend, when it comes to different agencies in the U.S. government, how can we engage the African diaspora to really move forward, whether it's empowering women or empowering youth, right? And I always say something, every year we come to to New York for UNGA, and we have several meetings, several conferences, and I always say, when it comes to women, if you're not at the table, you're on the agenda. You're on the agenda. And so for me, I love conferences like this because we're not only on the agenda, but we're also at the table. And at the table is really a lot of our African diaspora. And so we're at a place where when it comes to our policy, we can no longer think in terms of simply doing things in Africa, but what can we do with Africa? Partnership is critical and partnership is key. And the African diaspora, when it comes to our policy, I think is a very creative way to engage our policy.
So strategic partnerships, and I saw you shifting there, Dr. Jemima. Something tells me you feel passionately about this. Go for it.
No, I wanted to mention three key things that I think we must do and that we have started to do at UN Women, given our mandate. We got a beautiful mandate that includes normative work around gender equality, coordinating the UN system, and then working on the ground with policymakers and women rights organizations. The first one is on care. And what we're doing is making sure governments have policies on care, national policies and strategies on care. We have 2 beautiful policies in Africa that we've started with in Kenya and Cape Verde. We are working with the Africa Union to make sure that this is across the whole of the African continent. We've done this in Latin America. A lot of countries now have their policies on care. So that work is recognized. It enters the calculations of countries' national statistics so that there is public investments on care. Part of that is doing analysis to show that this is not just a cost. I really liked what Winnie did. We've done analysis in 15 countries in Africa. Ethiopia showing 6 million jobs can be created by investing in the care economy. 64% of those jobs are going to go to women. In the long term, about 94% of the costs that will be invested will be recouped back. That you can actually create 3 times as many jobs in the care sector as you can in the construction sector. So this is important because we then start driving investments in the things that matter for women and girls. The second one I'll say is on financing, because every country in Africa has a public development bank, a bank that is mandated with financing social and economic development. There's a network of 525 of those around the world. We've formed a gender coalition on them. When you think about financing infrastructure, infrastructure does not end at the road. Infrastructure also includes care infrastructure. So when we think about investments, where does care come in? How is it in Africa we are still building markets that have no childcare facilities, and we know exactly who is going to be in that market? Yeah, it is women, it is young women in those markets, and every day we roll out big infrastructure, rural markets with not a single childcare facility in place. So what are you asking women to do? Double shifts, triple shifts. You are going to sell your goods with your child on the back. What are the implications for that child's health? Because during the day they are playing around in the water, in the mud, so it's almost like we don't even care for our children. I find that very problematic, even as a
You mentioned
as a
you had
person.
3 things to mention. So can I give you a chance to mention the last one very quickly before we get to the IFC?
I want to mention the last one because we talk about young women's employment, and we really have to think about what is this workspace that we are putting women into. It's a workplace that's riddled sometimes with sexual harassment. Every time they enter into that workplace, they are going to earn 80 cents for every dollar that men earn. And so the other thing we are doing is bringing private sector, trade unions, governments together to say, can we have pay transparency? Can we have legal frameworks that disallow discrimination on pay based on gender? And can we have that data available, because it starts from transparency. So we convened something called the Equal Pay International Coalition, making sure that there's transparency, that we are eliminating sexual harassment in the world of work. Otherwise, we are putting young women in workplaces that are not conducive for them, that are harmful to them.
Thank you so much. I must bring the IFC on this one because we want to talk about solutions, policies that work. What do we need to do to scale them up?
So, IFC is today the largest development finance institution working with the private sector. And our conversations start with our client at firm level. And in every conversation that we have with our clients, where we challenge them is to take a 360-degree look at how they work, how do they buy, who are their suppliers, how do they employ, how many women are in their workplace, but also who has access to their product and services. Financial institution will be how many loans do you give to those women. So when you come to the financial institution, and we try to really untangle why progress has been so slow in terms of women entrepreneurs being able to access funding. As I say, I've been a financier myself, and the first thing that you are taught is really to look at a profile of a borrower, looking at the past. How this borrower has been able to reimburse. And most young women don't have this past history. But at the same time, And the fintech company has taught us to do that. In reality, what makes a borrower reimburse is not the past. Yes, it's its financial strength, but it's also the character of the borrower. I mean, does he want to reimburse or not? Some of the richest people in the world don't reimburse. So we spoke about the resilience of this young woman and the resilience of women in general. And I think this resilience makes them a better borrower later because they are determined, they are focused, etc. But today, none of the financial model and the risk analysis, some fintechs are more visionary and start to look in that space. I've really embedded those. And I think this would really change the approach of financial institutions if they were to give a weight on that character of a borrower, of a woman. The second point is the granularity of small women entrepreneurs. They operate at small scale. So it's very difficult for any financial institution to aggregate those small scale and understand the wallet size, the opportunity. Because reaching women at small scale, it's expensive in the delivery model. So any platform, and one again, we'll talk about digital and how digital can revolutionize. For me, it's really an opportunity to work with those digital platforms that have the ability to aggregate and show the scale of the opportunity that this market really represents. Lastly, it requires also intentionality in the design and the tailoring of the product for those women entrepreneurs. Really understand where they are in their journey and being able to provide the financial product that are appropriate for those women.